When you think of Nazi Germany, lots of adjectives probably come to mind. Evil, racist, heinous, and bigoted, just to name a few. These are all tragically accurate terms to describe the regime, undoubtedly one of the most loathsome to ever blight the pages of our history books. But yet, when we look beyond the raw, undistilled evil of the regime, we see that such terms are far from all-encompassing, and that actually many of its practices and norms are equally well described by another word. And that word is weird. Today we're going to dive deep into the history of 5 of these utterly bizarre and eyebrow-raising practices. So let's dally not and get straight into it. It's well known that the Nazis were rather partial to their Aryan children, but what is less known is that they established an entire institution dedicated to the bizarre, almost mass production-esque birthing of as many Aryan children as possible. Dubbed the Lebensborn program, it was a chilling illustration of the Nazi obsession with racial purity. Established on the 12th of December 1935 by Heinrich Himmler, one of the main architects of the Holocaust, Lebensborn was an SS initiative, state-sponsored association. Contrary to some misconceptions, it wasn't a coercive breeding program. Instead, its primary goal was to increase the population of children who met the stringent Nazi criteria of being racially pure and healthy Aryans, a grim testimony to the Nazi obsession with eugenics, which they dubbed racial hygiene. Headquartered in Munich, Germany, the program took multifaceted approaches to accomplishing its goals. One of its initial steps was to provide welfare to mostly unmarried mothers, so long as they had Aryan children, of course. This was crucial to promoting birth rates in a society where unwed pregnancies were a source of significant stigma. By offering support, the Nazis encouraged the birth of the racially pure children that they valued so dearly. One of the key sources of welfare for these women were the women's hostels known as Lebensborn homes, which served as sanctuaries where these women could give birth in secret and, if they chose, leave their children to the care of the state. About 60% of the mothers in the program were unmarried. For those abandoned children, Lebensborn also facilitated adoption processes. These children were often placed with families, particularly SS members and their kin, further embedding the program's reach into the fabric of Nazi society. Contradictorily, while the Nazis promoted birth within the Lebensborn framework, they endorsed and often legalized abortions for children who were disabled or non-Germanic. The reach of Lebensborn wasn't restricted to just Germany either. With the progression of the war and subsequent occupations, it spread its tendrils across Europe, extending to countries with significant Germanic populations. Lebensborn homes sprang up in countries like Norway, Poland, Denmark, even France. Its function varied country by country, however, as in Norway, its activities were primarily towards aiding children born from unions between German soldiers and Norwegian women. But the real dark side of Lebensborn, as if it wasn't dark enough already, lay in its kidnapping of children from occupied territories, particularly Poland and Yugoslavia. Many children were forcibly taken from their families based on evaluations against Aryan criteria. They were subjected to tests and categorized. Some were inducted into German families or boarding schools, where they underwent a rigorous process of Germanization. They were also assigned new German names, taught Nazi ideologies, and trained to discard memories of their real families. Those who resisted these brutal attempts at indoctrination were sent to concentration camps. On the matter of these kidnappings, Himmler was recorded stating that it was the duty of Nazis to either assimilate the good blood into their community or destroy it. Post-war, the legacy of Lebensborn remained a sore point for its survivors. While many of the children born through the program were in good health due to the premium care they received, the end of the war saw a reversal of their fortunes. They, along with their mothers, especially the unwed ones, faced the wrath of local communities who viewed them as Nazi collaborators. Many of those children and women were ostracized, beaten, and expelled from their communities. For years, misconceptions about Lebensborn persisted, largely due to inaccurate journalism that oversold the evil of the program and lingering Nazi sympathies that undersold the brutality. Many still believe it to be a coercive breeding program, a notion debunked by the historical record. Nevertheless, the true intent of Lebensborn, to artificially engineer a racially pure Aryan race, remains one of the chilling reminders of the lengths that the Nazis went to in order to realize their warped vision for the world, and ultimately is nothing if not pretty weird. Board games and children's toys, with their playful essence and educational value, have been an integral part of human civilization for millennia. Often regarded as harmless pastimes or valuable learning aids, these games have been used to teach strategy, impart moral lessons, and foster cooperation among players. But during the dark era of the Third Reich, however, these innocent toys morphed into sinister tools of propaganda and indoctrination, penetrating the sanctity of childhood and corrupting the minds of young Germans with board games rife with twisted ideologies and saber-rattling militaristic rhetoric. This was a stark contrast to their British counterparts, who were typically engrossed in quaint games like marbles and tiddlywinks. But for German children, they could enjoy such games as Bombers Over London. Fashioned as a pinball-style game, the game revolved around the objective of bombing London, with players receiving points for successfully targeting key British locations like the submarine base at Scapa Flow. Simultaneously, however, the game also penalised bombing neutral cities such as Brussels and Amsterdam, highlighting the Nazis' strategic and geopolitical objectives. However, the propaganda went beyond mere military ambitions, and with the regime's dangerous obsession for racial purity and the Aryan ideal always being at the forefront of proceedings, board games were also used to indoctrinate the young to these values. A 1935 produced doll designed for 3- and 4-year-olds encapsulated this racial obsession. Dressed in the garb of the Nazi militia, the doll bore the typical Aryan features: blonde hair and blue eyes. Such toys were carefully curated to imprint ideas of racial superiority and instill a sense of pride and identity in the Aryan race from an impressionable age. Games that chronicled and glorified the journey of the Nazi regime were also rampant. For instance, board games like United Against the Enemy narrated tales of the Nazis' wartime struggles. Even more direct in its messaging was the game Through Struggle to Victory. This game focused on the Nazis' 1933 rise to power and focused on Hitler, drawing attention to his dominant role in the German state and the narrative of the Third Reich. This grand and positive portrayal of Hitler was not just confined to board games either, being rampant across many different sorts of children's toys in Germany, ensuring that the younger generation would have a positive perception of him. One such toy was a figurine designed in his likeness. Equipped with a flexible right arm, this figurine familiarized children with the Nazi salute, embedding respect and reverence for the Führer early on. Children's literature was also tainted by Nazism. Stories such as Ulz Fights for Hitler and Ulla, a Hitler Maiden, showcased various challenges faced by relatable young protagonists, only for them to find salvation and purpose by embracing Nazism. These stories were crafted with the dual purpose of entertainment and indoctrination, ensuring that the young minds consuming them viewed Nazism not just as a political choice, but as a very way of life. In retrospect, the Nazi era provides a glaring example of how something as innocent as board games can be turned into powerful tools of manipulation. These games, interspersed with war motifs, racial ideals, and political propaganda, illuminate the depths to which the Nazi regime was willing to stoop to secure their vision for Germany's future. And for our purposes today, they most absolutely qualify as weird. Art, that ever-present mood lifter and thought-provoker, was also tainted and made decidedly weird in Nazi Germany. Elsewhere in the world, the early 20th century saw an explosion of creativity and artistic experimentation worldwide, with artists breaking boundaries and exploring new mediums and themes. But in Nazi Germany, this exuberance was met with suspicion, disdain, and outright hostility. To the Nazi regime, modern and abstract art wasn't just different or challenging, it was degenerate, a term laden with moral judgment indicative of a perceived decline in cultural values. This disdain for modern art was deeply rooted in Nazi ideology, which was fiercely nationalistic, traditionalist, and opposed to anything perceived as foreign, decadent, or subversive. Modernist art, with its diverse influences and often radical departures from classical styles, was seen as an affront to the true Aryan spirit. Artists like Marc Chagall, Vasily Kandinsky, and Paul Klee, whose works were vibrant, abstract, and challenging, were particular targets, as their art did not fit into the narrative of strength, unity, and racial purity that the Nazis were trying to promote. The campaign against degenerate art was both systematic and brutal. In 1937, the Nazis embarked on a mission to cleanse German museums of artworks that did not align with their ideology. Thousands of paintings, sculptures, and prints were confiscated. Some of these were sold off, often at a fraction of their value, while others were just destroyed outright. These actions weren't just about aesthetics. They were a clear and calculated move to control and manipulate the cultural narrative of the nation. By eliminating modernist influences, the Nazis aimed to create a sanitized, ideologically compliant version of German culture. But the Nazis didn't stop at merely confiscating these artworks. Keen to showcase their cultural triumph and further demonize modern art, they organized the infamous Degenerate Art exhibition in Munich in 1937. The exhibition was not a celebration, but a public shaming. Over 650 artworks confiscated from German museums were displayed in chaotic, haphazard manners, often accompanied by mocking labels and slogans. These artworks were presented as evidence of a supposed decline in cultural and moral values, as examples of the decadence that was corrupting German society. But the exhibition was a propaganda masterstroke. It attracted over 2 million visitors in its first location alone and traveled to several other cities. The general public, already subjected to years of anti-modernist propaganda, often left the exhibition with a reinforced disdain for modern art. However, internationally, the exhibition and the broader campaign against modern art was met with outrage and despair. For many outside Germany, this was further evidence of the Nazi regime's barbarity and its ignorance. Yet in a bitter twist of irony, while the Nazis were busy deriding and destroying modernist masterpieces, they were inadvertently ensuring their immortality. The very act of labeling these artworks as degenerate and showcasing them in such a high-profile manner made them symbols of resistance against tyranny and ignorance. Many of the artists who were mocked and marginalized by the Nazis are today celebrated as giants of 20th century art. Their works, many of which survived the purges, now fetch astronomical sums in auctions and are predominantly displayed in the world's leading art museums. In the aftermath of World War II, as the full extent of Nazi atrocities came to light, the campaign against modern art emerged as a telling footnote, a testament to the regime's broader mission of control and cultural homogenization. While the physical destruction of art was tragic, the Nazis' most profound failure was ideological. They sought to define and to dictate beauty, to force art into a narrow, prescriptive box. And in the process, they replaced art up and down the length of Germany with rows upon rows of empty, soulless, botched bastardizations of classical styles. And if that isn't weird, we don't know what is. One of the regime's most insidious strategies, and one that definitely introduced plenty of weirdness, was its determined focus on the nation's youth. The seeds for the nation's future were sown in the minds of children, cultivated meticulously through indoctrination, and molded into the perfect Aryan citizens. Central to this strategy were the Hitler Youth for Boys and the League of German Girls for Girls, organizations designed to ensure the next generation perpetuated the Nazi ideology. These organizations were omnipresent too, as by 1939, membership in these organizations became mandatory for all Aryan children between the ages of 10 and 18. The Hitler Youth was established well before the Nazis came to power, but its significance grew immeasurably once Hitler was in control. Boys starting at age 10 would join the young folk before graduating to the actual Hitler Youth at 14. These organizations weren't merely about propagating Nazi ideology, however, but that was a major component. They also prepared boys for future roles as soldiers and leaders in the Third Reich. Activities in the Hitler Youth mirrored military training. Boys participated in parades, marches, and simulated war games, for which they were taught to handle weapons, navigate, and provide first aid. Physical fitness was also emphasized, and so were attributes of discipline, obedience, and loyalty to the Führer. Alongside this, the curriculum also delved deep into Nazi ideology, with anti-Semitic teachings and lessons that glorified the Aryan race. All of this ensured that when these boys reached conscription age, they were already fervent believers in the Nazi cause, and they were primed for military or political service. On the other hand, the League of German Girls had a distinctly different, though equally sinister purpose. While the boys were groomed for war, the girls were prepared for their roles as homemakers and mothers, the bearers of the next Aryan generation. They were taught that their primary duty was to raise racially pure children and support their husbands. Starting as young girls at the age of 10, they would progress to the League of German Girls at 14, and then, if they chose, to the Faith and Beauty organization, which catered to girls between 17 and 21. Activities for these girls were aimed at nurturing skills that would make them ideal mothers and homemakers. They were taught to cook, sew, and manage a household. But it wasn't just about domestic skills. Physical fitness was emphasized, albeit differently from the boys, with the focus being on making them healthy for childbearing. They participated in sports, gymnastics, and other exercises that the Nazis believed would make them robust and fertile. Simultaneously, they too were indoctrinated with Nazi ideology, emphasizing the importance of racial purity and their roles in furthering the Aryan race. However, it is essential to understand that the gendered roles didn't mean girls were kept entirely away from militaristic training. As World War II progressed and Germany faced increasing manpower shortages, many girls from the Leagues were trained as anti-aircraft gun assistants, and some even served in auxiliary roles in the armed forces. The sheer effectiveness of the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls can't be understated. By the time World War II began, the Nazis had a generation of youth who were ardent supporters, thoroughly indoctrinated, and ready to serve the Third Reich's cause, be it on the battlefield or on the home front. In the aftermath of the war, the world came to realize the extent of the manipulation and control exerted by the Nazis on their youth. These organizations were not just youth clubs. They were tools of propaganda, ensuring the perpetuation of a dangerous ideology. And although certainly evil, there can be no denying that weird is also an appropriate adjective. In histories, the day-to-day manifestations of the Nazis' obsession with racial purity is often focused on its victims. And that's as it should be, because the brutal ordeals they had to suffer can never be forgotten. But have you ever stopped to think how it manifested for the lucky Aryans on top of Nazi Germany's racial hierarchy? Unsurprisingly, it was just a bit weird, with the ability to display and prove one's racial purity being not just a societal expectation, but a daily ritual, and one that greatly impacted the lives of ordinary Germans. Central to this racial hygiene ideology was the concept of the ancestry passport. This document was a tangible testament to one's racial purity, ensuring that its holder was of Aryan descent and thus could lay claim to the privileges of German citizenship under the Nazi regime. This wasn't just a symbolic certificate to be kept locked away. Instead, it became an everyday necessity, akin to an identity card, one that could be demanded at any point, be it at work, during travel, or even social events. For the common German, the process of obtaining this vital passport was no easy task. It required them to dive deep into their ancestral history, often tracing it back generations. People scoured church baptismal records, old family Bibles, letters, and any other form of ancestral proof. The task was daunting, time-consuming, and fraught with anxiety. After all, the discovery of a single non-Aryan ancestor could have severe repercussions, from social ostracization to losing one's job, or, well, obviously even worse. But it was the social ostracization of being found to have dirty blood, in particular, that really permeated daily life in Germany.
Filthy little mudblood.
For example, conversations at social gatherings and family dinners, which once revolved around everyday topics, now often veered toward discussion of genealogy. Stories of pure Germanic ancestors were worn as badges of honor, while whispers of possible non-Aryan lineage could lead to inescapable hushed conversations, speculation, and much tutting from pure Aryans wherever one went. Children weren't spared from this daily obsession with racial purity either. Schools under the influence of the Nazi regime began emphasizing the importance of racial purity. Lessons in biology no longer just touched upon genetics in general, but were skewed to promote the idea of Aryan supremacy. Children were taught about the superior genes they supposedly carried and were often tasked with creating their family trees, emphasizing the purity of their lineage. Those who couldn't confidently trace back their Aryan ancestry often became subjects of mocking or bullying. This obsession also reshaped German society's cultural and leisure activities. Genealogical societies, once a niche interest, became mainstream. Towns and cities saw a surge in the establishment of research centers dedicated to helping citizens trace their lineage. Libraries experienced an influx of people seeking old records, and a new breed of experts specializing in tracing Aryan lineage emerged. But the implications of this daily ritual went far beyond social dynamics or leisure activities. The ancestry passport became a ticket to life's essential aspects. Want to get married? You and your partner would need to produce your ancestry passports to ensure a racially pure union. Thinking of joining the military or getting a civil service job? Your ancestry passport would be scrutinized first. For many, life's major decisions became inextricably tied to this document, imbuing everyday existence with a mix of pride, paranoia, and persistent anxiety. Furthermore, Eventually, even private businesses keen to align with the Nazi ideology started demanding ancestry passports from their employees. Those who couldn't provide satisfactory proof often found themselves out of jobs. For artists, performers, or writers, the scrutiny was even higher, with their lineage determining whether their art would be celebrated or labeled degenerate. The harrowing story of the ancestry passport showcases the pervasive influence of Nazi ideology in every nook and cranny of Germans' lives. It serves as a haunting reminder of how the lines between state policies and daily routines can blur, leading to an entire nation becoming complicit in a dangerous, divisive ideology. And to close us off today, as is often the case with Nazism, the practice was not just evil, it was damn weird.